Okay, what's up everybody? Welcome to my first ever behind the scenes that I think I've done for a very, very long time. I wanted to take a little bit more of an in-depth look at First of the Year, the Remastered project that I've just posted. If you missed it, check it out, there'll be a card somewhere, you can see that. But yeah, obviously, First of the Year, it's a very, very important Launchpad project, obviously originally created by Sir Neville. It's essentially, it's the holy grail of Launchpad, like, let's be honest at this point. So me stepping foot in here and trying to change things around, remaster it, obviously it's a very, very sensitive thing to do. So I wanted to go a little bit more into what I changed, what I didn't change, just my thought process with creating lights, the new sampling and everything like that, and also just to give you a little bit of an insight into how I make these projects in general if you don't know how this is done. So what I've done, I've actually got both projects open at once, so mine and Nev's at the same time. Up here on the Launchpad Pro we've got my Remastered project, and then down here on the Launchpad Classic of course we've got Nev's project, so we can kind of compare the two and then see exactly what's different between the two projects, so what's changed over the last 13 years? Yeah, around about that, which is insane. It's been such a long time and I'm still doing this. Anyway, so let's get started. Let's take a look at page 1. Okay, so let's take a look at page 1. The main similarity, of course, between page 1, both on mine and Nev's project, is the way that you play the drums and the stabs and everything. So of course on Nev's project, it's played like this. And I feel like that's very iconic at this point. My project, it's very similar, so you can play it like that. You can play it like that. Obviously, the first difference you'll notice is obviously there's some different coloured lights in there, as well as the light effects on the edge of the Launchpad as well. But the main difference with my project here is that I've added in the hi-hat that you play together. So over here, so you actually end up, rather than just playing like this, you actually play it with the hi-hat at the same time that you do the button on the right here, so it's played like this. So kind of, it adds a little bit more to it, gets you to do a little bit more with that left hand, and then obviously gets really complicated later by the time you start playing like 5 different things at once. So that's the main similarity between the left hand. Obviously the right hand, you may have noticed, is very, very different. So in Nev's project, it's played like this. No, it's not. So a lot of kind of reused samples there, which I think is a really smart thing to do when obviously you've only got 64 buttons and a lot of samples to put together all at once. One change that I made here, besides the entire layout, is where on Nev's project you have this button that plays the 3 little vocal chops. On my project, it's actually 3 individual samples, so there's a little bit more that you have to play. So where Nev's plays like this, mine ends up playing like this. So there's a little bit more that you end up doing all at the same time, basically, and obviously pairing that together with the left hand is quite a challenge. Yeah, you may have noticed there as well. The other thing, of course, I've added is this crash cymbal. So by the time you're less than even halfway through the project, you're already playing 4 things at once. So like that. So it's very, very difficult at that point. So one other difference you may have noticed between mine and Nev's project is of course the difference in the sound that I've used for the project, so the samples. Obviously stem extraction tools have come a long way since 2013 when Nev's video came out. So obviously he did great for his time. I'm no music producer, so even to this day I couldn't get stems like he did, but obviously the tools have come such a long way over the last few years. So we've got, you know, stem extraction in Live 12.3, we've got tools like Ultimate Vocal Remover, which both of those are used in conjunction, and then phase cancellation, and it's just, there's so much you can do with getting these stems and having clean samples now, and I think that's the most important thing when it comes to having a project like this. And of course, one of the things that stem extraction has allowed me to do is add entirely new parts to this project that never made it into the original Nev project. Like, for example, the drums at the end of the intro. So we have this, for example. So yeah, it's a really nice section that I'm glad I was able to add in. The timing for that is weird. So actually like playing that as a live performance is much harder than, well, obviously much harder than listening to the song, but yeah, that timing is really strange. The other thing, of course, as I mentioned with the new tools for stem extraction and that sort of thing, has allowed me to get much cleaner pad samples for the kind of third section of the intro. So where in Nev's project they were placed like this, you can hear they're kind of just looped sections, so I don't know exactly where in the song he's gotten those parts from, but obviously the improvement in the tools now has allowed me to make stems that sound like this. So it's a much nicer, obviously, sound in general. So obviously being able to play those on their own, it sounds just great, especially when you play it all together. Not that you want to, because it really hurts my hands to do this. Nope, I've not got it. But yeah, it allows you to have some really clean sounding samples, especially. You'll notice it across the whole project. So it's a really, really fun part to play. Obviously, I'll have a tutorial on this coming out very, very soon, along with the project. So once it's available, feel free to have a look at the tutorial. It'll be one of those classic tutorials where I actually take you through how to play it, rather than my lazy, I'll just film the buttons that are pressed kind of tutorials. So hopefully we'll get a lot of people playing this project again. So that'll be really, really nice to see. Obviously, a bit of a challenge, but I'm sure you can take it on. So one of the other things I did for the vocal chop samples on page 1 was just a really clever use of basically stitching 2 together so that I can save on space essentially for the for this part. So where a little bit earlier in the project the vocal chops play like this. So you've got that's the timing the first time round that you play it, but then the second time round, it's a little bit of a different timing the second time round that you play it. So this sample right here is actually 2 different samples sort of stitched together at one point, but obviously it tailors it more towards the Launchpad project so that when you play it all together it sounds great, you know. And then obviously by playing the second sample after that, it chokes that first sample, so you know the extra stuff that I've added doesn't show through. But yeah, just some overall improvements on the actual audio and what you play, as I say, with the triple button here versus, you know, it's a very different project. But yeah, I feel like you guys will have a lot of fun playing it. Yeah, that's, I would say, is the hardest part of the project. So just a quick other thing actually for page 1 that is across the project. One of the new things in Launchpad Tech is automatic page changing. So what you can have, in fact, very much based on Wormhole, one of Nev's old plugins. What you can now do is you can have it so that when you press the last button of a page, it will automatically switch to the next page. So when you're done playing, just instantly swaps over like that. It's a really nice and seamless performance experience. So with those, when I was talking about those drums, these parts here, and then when you press that last button, that then changes to page 2. So you can start doing those pianos. Speaking of page 2, so page 2, or as we all call it, the piano section, is actually page 4 in Nev's project, so it's actually a slightly different orientation. I've done my pages basically in chronological order, so it's the intro, then we've got the pianos, then the build, then drop, then outro, which is not part of Nev's project, by the way, which we'll get to that, whereas Nev's goes more like intro, pianos, build, drop, so it's in a bit of an unusual order, but obviously times change things, so yeah, that's just the layout of my project, so it's a little bit different to Nev's one. So, page 2. The only similarity between, I think, mine and Nev's project, the only similarity here is the placement of the drums. So where on mine it's placed like this, just like that. On Nev's, yeah, it's essentially the same layout. So if you know a little bit about how to play Nev's project already, you're probably about 40 to 60% of the way there to learning mine. There's just a few alterations here and there, so there you go. So forgive me for this, the piano part of Nev's project I have not played for a while, hence why I decided to make it so different for my project, but Nev's piano section goes a little bit like this. obviously with the drums as well. So mine plays completely differently to that. I have ended up using multi-sampling, so you've got this kind of layout. So it's a little bit different again to Nev's project. The main thing here really with those multi-samples, if I ever do any kind of multi-sampling, I try and make sure that those multi-samples are similar in some way. So yeah, where here you've got a few multi-samples on this button, they're the same piano note, it's just for sake of smoothness, I've made it so that it alters. What I mean by multi-sampling, if you don't know already, is essentially multiple samples loaded onto one button, and then each time you press that button, it progresses through to that next sample. So like on here, I've got at least, I think, 2 different ones. Yeah, so they're the same note, but very, very slightly different, as I say, just for the sake of smoothness. Same up here, I believe. I think there's 5 on that button, something like that. So just to make the overall part sound a little bit nicer together, that's the whole layout. So yeah, together it ends up sounding pretty good. So the only part here that I didn't copy across to my project is that Nev has been able to get there's some lower pianos that he plays at the same time. So these ones here, I believe. Yeah, so he's managed to get those stems. I don't know how, but for this part, I opted not to do that. The only thing that I have that is kind of similar is while you're playing this layout, you've got these 2 buttons up in the top. And you can see I've kind of mimicked that light a little bit, as well as adding an effect to the edge of the Launchpad. Yeah, so by doing that together, it kind of pulls reference to that little cross layout. So it's a subtle nod to that little part of the project. So one of the differences as well, I wanted to take a lot of the samples that Nev's project had, which were basically, it seemed like multiple things that could have been chopped up a little bit more, but obviously the thing I think with Nev's project at the time was that for samples like this one right here, it's obviously playing 3 of those piano notes together. Part of the reason he would have done that at the time is that we didn't have things like automatic page changing or anything like that. You know, we're talking late 2013 Launchpad. Max for Live was unheard of in the Launchpad scene, at least at that point. So, but for my project, I have actually split up that just to make it basically a little bit more accurate. So these 3 samples over on the left side. And then by the time you play that end one, now you've automatically changed over to page 3. So yeah, and then, as I say, it's modern tech coming in to kind of influence how the project actually works. So one final difference here on the piano section is that obviously you play it twice. In the original song, those 2 builds are actually very, very slightly different. So when you're going into the second build, there's an additional sample that I've added, this one here. So yeah, there is actually a little just vocal fade in the background. So the first time around you play it, it sounds a little bit like this. Like that. But then the second time you play it, it's like this. So yeah, just that little bit that was in the original song. That's almost the whole reason I did this. There was just a couple of extra details in that original song that I wanted to make sure were a part of this, so that you could add a little bit more creative freedom. You could play it how you want. You know, there's just more options basically, alongside more accuracy. So yeah, there you go. That's page 2. Let's have a look at page 3. Okay, so page 3, this is where we're really starting to get into the fun stuff now. So again, my page 3 is very much inspired by Nev's page 2. Again, there's a page discrepancy here, but whatever. So Nev's project plays like this. Like that, whereas mine plays like this. So a little bit of a different layout, but you can see those first 4. That's going to sound horrible, but you can see by that is obviously very much inspired by the original project. It's a similar layout, but not quite the same. So I just find the way I've done it a little bit more natural to me, at least. But yeah, so that's how that part starts. Obviously, as you can tell, again, with newer tools, the audio does sound very, very different on this project. So one thing that actually we've both done here that is both the same and different is that we've both used the same vocal sample layout as the previous page. page. Now, I think we've both subtly agreed here that what is important about this project is that you essentially use the intro, that really complicated section, to set rules that you obey throughout the project. So like in Nev's project, for example, the vocals are played like this. And in my project, they're played like this. So very different, but we've established that that's how those parts are played earlier in the project. So now what we're doing is we're pulling reference to that again, so that obviously, you know, the viewer understands they've had that part added earlier in the video, so that they know that's how you play it. It's not a completely different layout, because if it was entirely different, it wouldn't make any sense. So we've both done exactly that. We've copied the same thing from the intro to page 3, or the build, so that obviously, yeah, it's an understandable thing here. So it's very important that you do that, and it's understandable. And what I think a lot of people don't remember all the time is that with Launchpad, it's not the most attainable thing, especially if you've got crazy light shows and different sampling going on all the time. So if you can essentially use the start of the video to set rules that you follow, then the viewer kind of follows those rules as well. It's like, okay, we've established this at the start of the video. Oh, he's doing that again. So yeah, that's something that I think me and Nev both subconsciously agree on, that is very important when it comes to creating projects like this. So that's what we've both done here. Going off on a bit of a yap tangent here, but anyway, so later into the project, of course, on the build section, Nev's one does play very, very differently here, just because of obviously the capability of the sound. So Nev's section, he actually mentions this in the tutorial. There is a segment here where you can kind of get away with just playing it on its own without like the toms and the extra drums and stuff. That's this part here. So you can kind of get away with just playing that part if you're just doing Nev's project. Unfortunately, in my project, you can't get away with that, because it's a lot more complicated here. So where later on, I've got something similar where you do have a couple of samples buttons that you just press that kind of fill in the background layers. You got these ones here. That's a very different light effect, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, you can't really get away with just playing the kind of background elements there, because obviously new tools has allowed me to do just a completely new like drums section. So for my drums, we have this kind of layout. Oh, that's the wrong page. Cursed automatic page changing. Anyway, the drums. In fact, what I'll do just for this section, because it's a little bit more complicated, I'll change over to just single button light so you can actually see what I'm doing. But yeah, the drums here, very, very different, very, very complicated. So it goes a little bit like this. Very, very different. But yeah, pair that obviously with doing the samples down here. And don't forget, of course, we're doing the vocals at the same time. So there's actually a lot more going on together here. So these are the vocals in that segment. Yeah, very, very different kind of performance going on there. So yeah, together you end up getting this. Yeah, it's a real shocker when you end up playing that for the first time. So yeah, that's one of the main differences, of course, with the build. The other difference, of course, that we talked about very briefly, of course, is that light effect. The main Call 911 Now light effect is very different between mine and Nev's project. So his one looks like this. Call 911 Now! Which, by the way, props to Nev for being able to create, obviously, I'm sure you've seen the original video at this point, but for being able to create all of the light effects that he did with just preset what's called chain-based light effects, which are preset things in Ableton that you stack together. So where he stuck together a velocity of this particular color, a chord to join notes together, there's only a set amount of things that you could do in the earlier versions of Ableton before Max for Live Launchpad stuff came along. So he's been able to create all of these light effects just with really, really simple things. It was all based on velocity, chord, arpeggiator, MIDI effect rack, note length, just That's it. That's all we had at the time. And I do remember a little bit of that back in my time, sort of 2014, 15, of starting Launchpad stuff. But then thankfully 2016 came around and frankly rescued everyone. So you could actually just draw in the light shows. And obviously tools for that have gotten better over the years with things like iDrop, MIDI extension, MIDI launcher, and all that sort of stuff together. So yeah. Just obviously light shows have improved, but what I'm trying to do here is obviously just take a look back at what it was like, just so we can appreciate obviously where this has come from over the years. So of course the cool 911 now light effect in Nev's project looks like this. 911 now! Great for its time, it does the job, perfect. Mine does not look like that. Although that does, that's the wrong button on the wrong page. 911 now! So there's a lot of things going on here, so let's break that one down a little bit. So the actual light effect here, in fact, I'm going to turn off the audio just for a moment. So the light effect itself, there's a lot of things going on, obviously some random colors. Now that is actually something that's fairly easy to do, especially if you've got Live 11 or newer. So let's say right here, obviously we've got a light effect, right? So we've made just very quickly a yellow light effect that's just an arrow from left to right. We can do very, very easy. You can randomize velocity and you'll see it's just gone absolutely crazy down here. So if we now play this, you'll see that all of those colors are random, so you can get that really nice looking effect. So that's what I've done for that effect. Obviously that's kind of like a quick teaser of what's about to happen in the rest of the drop. Just throw everything that you've got at it. Obviously the intro to the video is a very, very subtle light effect, so it's a very impactful light effect. That's why I've kind of done it as in your face as possible. Obviously it's got the flashing 911 on the screen at the same time. So yeah, that's how you randomize the color. It's a very, very simple thing you can do, really. You can even randomize within a short range if you want to keep the colors close to each other, essentially. So very, very nice little feature of Ableton Live. So yeah, essentially that's how you would randomize the colors, and that's where that light effect comes from. So yeah, that pretty much sums up the main differences of the build section. No, it doesn't. There's one more thing. In fact, one other interesting thing I did with the multi-sampling on page 3, I've got this button here that actually has 2 samples loaded on it. Kind of breaking my rule of samples that need to be similar, but what I've got here is actually this button actually resets the layout of those samples. So when you play it all together, it works because obviously that's a section that you have to play twice, so it ends up going like this. So the first time round you play it, and then by the time you've pressed this button here, it's reset that multi-sampling so that when you do this the second time round, and then there you go, you end up playing that second note. Now the reason I've ended up putting that there, that is the most natural way of playing it to me. And of course the other thing that you have to do immediately after that is jump into those really complicated drums. So if I can place that last button close to the next really difficult part, that does make my life a little bit easier in terms of the actual performance. So yeah, I don't think it's been done much before, but yeah, multi-sampling that can be reset via another button, which is always pretty cool. And of course, don't forget, if you are playing this project and you always get confused by the multi-sampling, the top left button on the top row, if you hit that, no matter what device you have, that is a nice quick reset of everything. That stops all light effects. It should stop all audio as well. It should even reset the multi-sampling. So if you get completely stuck, it's not like the old Launchpad projects where you get lost and you have to remember what buttons are multi-sampled. You can now just hit one button, it's full reset. So you might see me if I'm ever doing a take, I'll hit that button up there just out of instinct, because it's just a nice like, oh, I've messed up, so that button will be my reset. So one final thought with the build section essentially is it's very slightly different the way you play it the first and second time in my project. Obviously there is a slight difference in Nev's project as well, but not quite as accurate to the original song as mine is, for example. So what I've done with the second time round that you play it, when you play that cool 911 light effect, you actually press 2 buttons together. So yeah, so the first time you play it, you press these 2. And essentially the reason I've done that is because there's a second sample here, like that, so it's got a little white noise riser at the end. So going into the first drop in the actual song, that white noise riser is present, but in the builds to the second drop, it's not there. So the second time around that you play the build, you can just press that top sample. So yeah, so you can go into that faster section like that. And it's just a little bit more accurate to how the original song sounds. Just, it's bringing out those little details. Of course, there is a slight light effect in there, which basically blends nicely with the end of the 911 light effect. So it ends up looking like this. 911 now! So where you've got that little red flash at the end, it's kind of hard to see. But, oh, wrong page. Yeah, just a little red flash at the end. That's all it really is. But yeah, obviously by pressing that button, that leads us into page 4. So it changes automatically. And speaking of page 4, let's do that now. This is the real fun part. So here we are. Now I would argue at the most visually interesting part of the entire project, the drop. Now, of course, the main difference here between mine and Nev's project is that he used something called chain-based light effects, which I briefly touched on earlier. As I explained, it's all of the Ableton inbuilt presets, so things like velocity, chord, note length, arpeggiator, basically stuff that is used by normal music producers to make differences to their MIDI, whereas I'm using just the piano roll and my plugin iDrop, which is a Launchpad focused light show development tool. So I've used all of that in conjunction to basically make the best light show that I feel I possibly could for the song. So let's take a look at that now and what's different between the two. And yeah, let's have a look. So of course, the very first light effect of the project is so iconic, I couldn't change it too much. So of course in Nev's project we have this, mine we have this. It's very, very similar. We've got a little bit of a difference in the actual corners of the Launchpad. It's actually a couple of effects layered together, but the overall feel of the effect is unchanged. Of course, the other main difference, Nev has a couple of alterations, a couple of different versions of that light effect in different colors. Whereas I've just got the one. So I guess his project is better, clearly. Well, it is, quite frankly. So yeah, so that's obviously the opening light effect. A couple of other differences here. We've got things like this versus Nev's. It's kind of almost a similar feel, actually. It's just bigger. It just fills the Launchpad. It's less centered around what button I press. But yeah, we got some similar light effects in here. So Nev's project, for example, these little triplet down here versus mine. Mine's just a little bit faster and obviously with a couple more colours in there. So the OG project, this button here, it's just that one long sample, and the light effect changes speed a little bit. Mine is actually a little bit different from that, so we've got the actual, I think 4 or 5 multi-samples on here, as well as some slightly different light effects. Yeah, so very, very different there. And then same again on this button. You'll notice that everything's kind of similar in a way. That's what I'm kind of trying to do here, is I'm trying to make a light show that feels faithful to the original. That's the main thing here. As I said, it's holy territory here, so I need to be careful. I don't want to change it too much, just kind of modernize it slightly, that's all. So yeah, so the light effect here is very different between the two. What you'll notice here is that we have a light effect that actually holds. Now, this is a new feature of my new plugin MIDI Launcher Pro, which can actually now listen to the MPE data of the MIDI. So if you set the release velocity to 0 and then set the mode to, I believe, hold, which will be in here somewhere. Where are we? Yeah, so here we are. First exclusive look at my new plugin MIDI Launcher Pro, coming very, very soon. We've got the release mode set to hold, which allows the plugin then to listen to those MPE affected notes where the release velocity is set to 0, and it essentially ignores the note off. So that light effect stays on forever. The only thing with this, because Ableton chains are not very friendly when it comes to stuck effects, it does have to be sent, basically transmitted to another device. So that's where I have this MIDI portal down here, which receives the held light effect, and basically any other held light effect also comes through here as well, so that you've only got one chain creating MIDI, and therefore it doesn't shout at you, because it just breaks very, very quickly if you have stuff held. So yeah, that's one of the new features of MIDI Launcher Pro. You'll notice there's a lot of effects in here with these kind of held effects, but then it's choked out by an effect that follows it, like this one. Yeah, and then it's gone like that, exactly like that. So again, on Nev's project, it's kind of, it's similar in a way. You've got a red square with a spiral. It's the same. You know, it's the same thing, but as I say, just modernized. Now, of course, this one I feel is a very, very classic Nev light effect. This one here with the repeating randomness. I decided not to have that in mine. We've got this instead. So it's a little different. We've got 9 multi-samples on this button here. I guess you can't see what button I'm pressing, but if you look at the tutorial coming out very, very soon, then you'll see exactly what buttons to press. Well, the actual layout of this page is very similar, despite having the crash, not the crash, what am I saying? The hi-hat, that's what it's called. So we've got the hi-hat in the drop now, whereas Nev's project did not have that. And some light effects to match that, which are layered using Matiazzi's Depths plugin. So one other difference here as well is the way you play my drop part of this project compared to Nev's, because his plays like this. So very different compared to mine. So mine includes this part in place of the little triplet at the end. So mine plays like this. Bear in mind, of course, we've also got the hi-hat in here, which was not present in Nev's project. So you'll see there, down here, I've got this. Whereas in Nev's project, that was not present. That is actually more accurate to the original song, so that's why I've included that there. So in Nev's project, we have this light effect here. We have a couple of different variations of it as well, which actually I'd completely forgotten about that. But in my project, we've got something similar, just this here. So you'll see it's kind of, it ends up in that like red X format. Yeah, that light effect is actually a very, very classic light effect of mine that I came up with all the way back when I did Bonfire, that cover from, what, 10 years ago-ish? So obviously with a slightly different gradient to those older projects. Obviously we've got the red, white, and green for my project, just because it fits in very nicely with everything else. That's kind of the color scheme I'm going for here. I find it very important that you have like a color scheme in a Launchpad project. If you have similar looking things, it ties everything together really nicely, whereas if you have a lot of complete randomness, then it just looks like it's been cobbled together. It's just not the way I do things. You know, if you've got a lot of similar sounding things, they should all be placed within basically an unwritten rule of like a group of effects. So you have similar colors together, similar shapes, for example, they should all be paired together. But then if you've got something dramatically different, then it should be a different color, it should be a different effect. So that's kind of what goes through my head, just to put that out there with why a lot of the light shows I do are the way they are. Like I said, yeah, it ties everything together really nicely. So putting that gradient on there as well, you know, it fits in really nicely with the rest of the project. So there you go, a little bit of Kaskobi mind insight, I guess. So there you go. So moving on from that yap sesh, anyway, to the next light effect, we've got this one here. And you'll notice it's very different to Nev's project because it looks like this. It's just the individual light effects kind of flipped 180 around, you know, the individual buttons you press, mirrored 180 around to the other side of the Launchpad. And of course, you'll hear as well that that has the kicks already applied to those samples, whereas mine, it doesn't have that. You actually have to play those, so you have to basically do like that. So it's it's played very, very differently, but it's not overly challenging. But if you already know how to play the original project, it's a nice development on top of that, basically. So of course we also have this effect here in Nev's project, looks like this, and on mine, I don't know what it is, but just in my head, I don't know if I see color as sound. The other way around, see sound as color, but I've always felt that sort of those growly basses like that make for a really nice purple. So stuff like that, you know, if you're kind of in the middle of like the visible spectrum, you know, you've kind of got the yellows and greens, they feel like very bright light effects, whereas if you've got like reds and purples, they feel like very deep, like growl bass like type light effects. So that's kind of why I use red, blue, purple in that way, whereas green, yellows, and whites will be kind of like the middle, like the higher end stuff. You'll notice that a little bit more later in the project, actually. So yeah, that's kind of why I've done like that white and purple effect there over the original. Obviously, don't forget, by the way, I can't believe I haven't even mentioned this up until this point, but Nev's old project, of course, he was using a Launchpad Classic. Now, the only colors you have are red and green. And of course everything in between, so orange, yellow, and whatever. But there's no white, there's no purple, there's no blue, no nothing like that. Blue was a luxury by the 2015. So obviously, you know, the original project didn't have any of that. So that's kind of why I've added a little bit of that back in, just to kind of spice things up a little bit. So some more arguably unnecessary Launchpad lore for you there. Now, in the vein of faithful light effects, we have this here from Nev versus this from me. I would argue very faithful, but just a slight modernization. In fact, it's hardly even a change, really. Now, for the second section of the drop in Nev's video, we have this. Please excuse my left hand playing, but yeah, in mine it's very different. I've used a lot of the release velocity 0 light effects again here with the hold at the end. I love the old like Inspiraspa style things that move and then connect to something else. I've always been a fan of that style of light effect. He's always been an inspiration for, even I would say today, for the light effects I make now, that's very much like what I base a lot of my stuff on. So for this section, it goes exactly like that, exactly like those old Inspiraspa videos where you've got things that move and then, yeah. You can see it really is that kind of style. But yeah, it's different again. I keep saying it's different. Of course it's different. It's 13 years newer. So just breaking this down a little bit slower, we have this. The thing I like about this is how with those lights, it's predictable when it starts, when it's kind of just a... And then when the notes get really high and kind of weird and unpredictable, they go in weird orders. And then obviously change color. And then following it up, of course, we have... Now that one's actually quite similar to Nev's original project, actually. Finally, a similarity. So Nev's original one looks like this. Whereas mine is this. It's literally the same, what I call the fizzle light effect, which life hack, by the way, is actually very, very easy to create, especially with something like eyedrop. So what we can actually do, we can come to here, we can place a MIDI note in the piano roll, and then let's generate a spiral out light effect. Now, what that will do, and the reason I've done it this way, is that this is the only eyedrop preset that will show all 64 buttons and make sure that only one is showing at any one time. Now, what you can do with that information, you can come over to here and press scramble note in eyedrop, and now that will essentially take all of those notes and scramble them within the selected range, so it doesn't add any, it doesn't take any away, so it makes sure that all of the notes that you originally had selected now actually still play, but just in a different order. So we now have this kind of effect. And that's how you get what I call the fizzle. So then what you can actually do, you can actually randomize those colors within a set range as well. So I think what I did originally, I think I randomized by 4. So yeah, it was originally blue, so you'll see all of those new colors are slightly blue, they're close to it. That is something you can do, especially if you're using colors in the lower half of the palette on the standard Launchpad. So what I ended up doing then, you can go to the gradient edit mode, and now I changed all of those colors out for basically the full saturation versions of those original colors. Because obviously you haven't got much of a selection here, it makes it very, very easy to just remap everything and still have it looking pretty good and like full resolution, not resolution, what am I saying? Yeah, so full saturation. So that's kind of the effect. That's how I made it, basically. I think it was very slightly different, but yeah, that's kind of the premise of how I put that one together. So back in Nev's projects, we have this light effect. And as I was saying earlier about the whole purple means growl bass thing, yeah, of course we have that again. You'll notice that in a lot of my videos, to be honest. I think that one's actually fairly similar. It's almost the same. So my project here again uses the release velocity and hold effect, so we can get these kind of light effects. Whereas Nev's looks like this. In a way, he was kind of using hold effects there as well. So it was building something. Now this one, of course, is, I think, a classic for Nev's video. It's the thumbnail for his as well, so this one. Mine, I didn't do that, it's this. that kind of, it sounds like a fizzle, doesn't it? That's the main thing. I want to make it look like what it sounds like, so it sounds like a fizzle. It doesn't look like 4 squares to me. That's not what I see when I hear that. We do have this here. It's a slight development on one of the light effects from earlier in the project. So yeah, it's the development on this one, but with different colors, because you got a little bit of a different melody going on in the background. And that's what I mean again about putting things in groups, because those two segments sound very similar, whereas Nev's here, obviously he's got this the first time around, and then the second time around it's played. Like, it's great because obviously you can track what's going on there, but I like to, as I say, tie things together in groups, so that's why mine looks a little different there. Now, I knew at some point in this video I had to tie in that like whip style light effect, this one here. It's like, of course, that's like the Nev light effect. Of course I'm gonna have to put that in here, so there you go. And of course, different to the OG project, whereas mine is this. But yeah, it's like I had to. Like, anyone who's watched old Nev knows that that's the light effect. So of course, yeah, I had to include that. Now, going back to my purple means growl bass ideology, we have this light effect. And in a way, similar to Nev's, but his actually expands, and of course, not purple, because you can't do that. And then my project also adds in one little extra button here, this one, which Nev's original project didn't have. There's nothing there. Now, of course, my drop page ends again slightly differently to Nev's, because again, he didn't have the ability to use like auto page or anything like that, so setting them automatically. So for him to be able to do that, we had to add in this little segment here. Right, and then you could change page. But what I've done, obviously, is a little bit more faithful to the original song. I've added in these 2 buttons here. So that one, which actually kind of plays that whole segment. You can still play the drums in the background of it, so you can do this, like that. But there's actually 2 of those. So where, obviously, that sequence is played like this, like that originally, you've got 2 different alterations which change the page depending on where you want to go. So let's say you just finished the first drop, for example, you're going into the second build, you would press this one, for example, and that would take you back to page 2. However, if you've just finished the second drop and you want to go to the outro, then you'd press this one, and now that takes you to page 5. The easy way to remember which is based on which is the first button that you play when you change the page. Conveniently enough, there's enough space left over in this project that I can add those 2 samples and they perfectly line up with those other pages. So when I press this one to go to page 2, and now you'll see, it's the first button of the next page that I press. Whereas if you want to go to page 5 and do the outro, you press this one, and you'll notice it's one of the first buttons that you press on that page. So that's a nice easy way to remember where you're going in the project. Obviously, auto page can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're new. So there is actually something in the project that I've added called practice mode. And if you turn that on, it will essentially disable all auto pages. So you can basically stick to page 4, learn it, and it's not sending you around the project. So it's something a little nice in there that it's a quality of life thing more than anything. So yeah, that is something you can do. Now, of course, we kind of already touched on the second piano section and the second build, so let's go straight in and talk about the second drop. There's a couple of differences here, not tons. One of which you could do in Nev's original project. It's just something I did differently in my video, was playing the little drum fill that I mentioned in the video itself. So playing it like this. It's very difficult. I'm like running on that button. So bang, 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 snare, bang, bang. It's really hard. But you can do that in Nev's project. It just opted not to do that for the video. Like, you can do it, look. So yeah, you can literally mix and match. It doesn't really matter. Technically mine's more accurate, but his doesn't give you wrist cramp. So who's the real winner here? So just to compare these 2 last light effects from the second drop, Nev's project, we have this. And technically, mine is kind of similar because it goes like this. I just think that, so with that last light effect, that really feels like a kind of like a rotor or a propeller or something, like spinning down. So yeah, I added a little spinning thing there because that's just what I see when I hear that. So yeah, we've got a literal light effect in there that demonstrates that. So final thought, we got the drum light effects in my project. Nev's one didn't have any. Well, I had the single button ones, but mine's a little different. Mine has this. We've got a multi-light on the cymbal. So despite the sound being the same, we just got these two little like flashes at the edge. And then the drums, we've actually got full Launchpad flashes, and then that's actually layered, I believe, on top of the rest of the light effects using Matiasi's Depths plugin. So I believe that wraps up the drop section. So let's move on to the outro, of course not a part of Nev's project, so this will exclusively be looking at my remastered version. Okay, so page 5, the outro. There's honestly not a lot to talk about here. It's kind of very similar to the intro segment. It's just, it's played slightly differently, that's all. So, of course, the stems that we have here cover both the bass and the vocals. So, as I've stated many times now, purple means growl, green and yellow is kind of the higher pitch stuff, so that's why we've got two little lines that come out of the effect to give the impression that obviously it's playing both things, because it is. And obviously this all ties together with the same sort of knowledge that you get from playing page 1, because you can do those pads, the drums and the stabs all at the same time. So yeah, there you go. There's not really much else on this page. The only other thing that I wanted to try on this page is something new that I'm calling remote multi-sampling. So where up here you've got the standard snare sound, and it doesn't multi-sample yet or anything like that. You'll see that the actual button that you press is kind of like a greenish light. It's a greenish light, you see that? So that is played, I believe, for the first 3 out of 4 sections for the drop. It's not for the drop, sorry, for the outro. I'm starting to lose my mind. I've been recording for a couple of hours. So yeah, so obviously it's this one particular snare sample. And obviously this doesn't have to be a multi-sample, but in the sake of accuracy, what I've done is I've made it so that this hat right here, you'll see it plays a light effect to kind of signify that it does something to the snare. In fact, let's show you. So it's this button here. That button multi-samples the snare remotely. So where you start with this, the hat changes it, and now we've got a different snare sound. So the only reason I've done that, I wouldn't normally, but because that hand motion as you're playing the outro is so natural to me, and obviously that's how you've played it for the rest of the project, I don't want to go and change it dramatically. And it's still a snare sound, so okay, bend the rules a little bit. Okay, whatever. But that is the snare sound that is played in the original song during that last few seconds. So just for the sake of accuracy, you don't have to change it. That's the thing here, is that if you had to, fine, then I'll make it a different button. But in the sake of accuracy, it's still a snare. There you go. So remote multi-sampling, using another button to multi-sample something else. Again, don't forget that top left button on the top row will reset everything. So yeah, if you ever get stuck, just hit that. And then there you go, it's all reset. There's not really many more light effects on this page, to be honest. The only other thing really is, as you're closing out the project, you have this little sequence here. Nice and simple. It's just some of those. I don't know, diagonal burst, I think I called it in iDrop at least. So yeah, so where in that little sequence you've got the actual pitch of the drums is decreasing, so I've got the size of the light effect decreasing. It's very nice to tie all of that together, and then obviously it ends on just those 4 little notes at the end there. And I think that's a really nice way to wrap up this little behind the scenes. Obviously, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you for just listening to me yap. I'm very good at yapping when it comes to this. I'm very passionate about Launchpads. So being able to tell you guys about my thought process and what goes on behind the scenes is very, very important to me. So thank you very, very much for watching. If you haven't checked out Nev's original cover, what are you doing? If you haven't checked out my remaster, also what are you doing? I don't know why you'd sit through however long this video is of me just yapping about light effects for 2 videos you've never seen before. Either way, I appreciate it, thank you. Also be sure to check out my plugins iDrop and Microlight. Microlight is the ones I've been using here to display what I'm showing on the Launchpad. iDrop is the plugin used to actually create the light show in my actual video. And so I think that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If there's anything else that I've missed, probably not. I went into a lot of detail, but if there's anything else about the project you want to know about, please drop it in the comments. Leave a like, leave a subscribe. Is that a sentence? Whatever. You know what to do. You're watching a YouTube video. Who cares? So again, I really appreciate you guys sticking around to the end. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.